there's one key principle in this, which we call talent flow. And talent flow has at its core that we're moving talent to work rather than work to talent. Like in a traditional way, you start with work and say, oh, who wants this work? You don't start with the talent, you start with the work. Well, in a skill-based organization, you start with the talent and the skills of the talent and then go to the work.
It's time for a new normal for learning.
Welcome to a new episode of Good Morning L&D. It's time for a new normal for learning. And today we're going to tackle a topic which might be the holy grail or the accelerator for this new normal for learning. You may have read it behind me already, the idea of a skill-based organization. And I'm super happy to have people on board who are not just talking about the topic, but who are actually really doing it. And not just since yesterday, since it became this hype. No, they are doing this for years and have been in this roller coaster journey of being a first mover. And this is what Good Morning L&D is all about. Bringing those first movers, into our show and discussing with them, learning with them, and learning also from their experience. And so I'm super happy to welcome first Meredith Wellard as the former VP of Learning and Growth at DHL. She was really the key architect behind one of the largest skill ecosystems, I think, and rollouts in the world. But we come to this in a minute. Meredith, welcome, and so happy that you dial in straight from Australia this morning. For you, I guess it's evening.
It is.
And welcome. And then on the other hand, we have Dr. Manuel Smukala. And Manuel is the head of skills intelligence at Bayer, and has been driving this idea of a skill-based organization and opportunity marketplace here also for years, right at this intersection of technology, strategy, and culture. Very welcome to have you as well, Manuel. And welcome to have you all here live in the session. I know many of you see and see our show and listen to our show afterwards, but happy to have also some people live with us today because you are, in the position to bring in your question, to become part of the discussion. So don't hesitate to post your questions or comments in the chat, and we're going to try to weave them in on the flow of this show, and especially at the end. So having said this, let's get started. Meredith, skill-based organization. I mean, is it a hype? Definitely, I think everyone is talking about it. When was your first moment that you really, got in touch with this idea of becoming a skill-based organization, and how did the meaning of it have maybe evolved over the years?
Yeah. So actually, it was quite somewhat. So I think the first thing is it is somewhat interesting that everyone gets excited about skills-based organizations now, when in actual fact, I think if you've been in learning and development for many years, what you know is that skills have been at the core of all learning activities that we've always wanted to do. The challenge has been we haven't really had the capacity or the money or the time to really invest in understanding what skills exist, where we have skill gaps. It was always done on this kind of event-based model, where we believe we have a gap, so we evaluate that and then we try to fill it. What we're able to do now, since some of the AI tools became available maybe 7 or 8 years ago, is actually automate that process of understanding what skills we have and what gap we have. So a little bit, I say it's not new really, it's just that we now can actually do it. And the other piece, just before Manuel comes in, is I think the compelling need, and I saw on the video at the introduction of the call, this whole idea that skills are moving so fast now. Knowledge is not the big thing anymore. It's our ability to apply that knowledge. It's our ability to learn how to do things differently in line with some of the changes in technology and other aspects of the world, whether that's, the global nature of business or anything else in between. Then we need skills, and we need them faster, and we need them before we need them, not after we need them. And so, there's a lot going on.
I mean, I love it. We're immediately, jumping into the discussion. Manuel, I think you have been also working very long on this idea of skills intelligence at Bayer. When was your first, contact with the topic? And also, would you agree with Meredith that, it has accelerated and has become a certain hype, also maybe through what is possible today, which wasn't possible years ago?
No, definitely. I mean, Meredith is absolutely right when she says skills isn't a new topic, right? Mm-hmm. And it's really technology that actually made this topic to be scalable. Mm-hmm. Now, you will also hear me talking later about technology, however, isn't making the trick, right? Technology is helping you to then land in business, right? Mm-hmm. Technology will always be an enabler. Where I actually became first, the idea of a skill-based organization for us started in talent acquisition from a very low use case in terms of how can we automate our screening, increase our time to hire and so on. So very process efficiency driven. If I look at where are we now, I mean, when you think about how skills are used today, mm-hmm. it's just the acceleration of the use cases that go far beyond talent acquisition for what you can use skills going forward. And that's exactly our journey. And where many companies are trying to figure out without having the ultimate answers, we also don't have it, on where can we use skills and how does it make sense for people.
So if we really try to boil it down, I mean, the skill-based organization, in one sentence, what does it mean, for you, Manuel, at Bayer, and happy to hear also, Meredith, your definition that maybe has also developed over time.
Yeah.
I would keep it very short and say a skill-based organization is one that prioritizes employee skills and competencies over traditional job titles. That's how I would call it.
Yeah. And I think I would be very similar to that. I think it's that piece which is saying role titles are not, and functional streams are not the answer anymore. We need to be looking at what skills people have that are able to be transitioned across. That broad T now is really important, that people are able to consider where they have skills that are adjacent to skills that might be needed in the future, and how do they transition across those. And a skills-based organisation is one, in the end, that is not fixated by the role title or the functional title, but is really able to understand that an analyst in finance could be an analyst in aviation, could be an analyst in HR, could be an analyst anywhere else, as a marketer in one place, could be a comms person in another, could be it doesn't matter, whatever the skills are. And I think that's important. That's a big shift.
Before we dive a bit deeper into what it is, and we prepared some stuff for that as well. What I really liked in this introduction, I think also of both of you, was, well, there was a growing momentum for the topic, and this momentum came from a technology side, which was what was enabled by especially maybe AI and those large language models helping to process all the data and and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, there was also this need or this urgency from the business to change faster, to adapt, and to become maybe more this fluid organization that is very flexible in terms of responding to market needs, new technology, and so on and so forth. And how did this basically? How did you feel this in your companies?
I mean, I think when I was working at DHL, it's obviously it's one of the world's largest companies. It's in every country in the world. And one of the biggest challenges is, how do you scale everything from talent acquisition to learning to back-end talent, succession planning and so forth, workforce planning? How do you scale it in a way where you can leverage the opportunities of 600,000 employees? That is the biggest marketplace where we were pulling talent from. Wow. But, to use that normally, it was just not possible. You didn't get the visibility. You had no sense of where people were in the world and were they ready? Did they have skills to do certain jobs? So I think, bringing that onto the table and being able to say that's a really compelling reason to use some of the technology to understand who we have in our business and what jobs they could do and what career paths they could follow. And then that was very engaging for employees. So there was a really compelling sort of case for it in the early days. And, the last point I think I would say is in any organization, particularly organizations that are heavily project-based or using agile methodologies, or even in consulting, where you've got people on assignments and so forth, you've got to have an understanding of who you've got and what skills they've got at scale. And then you need to be able to, in a very fast and efficient way, allocate those resources. And that's complex. Yeah.
So what I hear from you is, in terms of what's in it for DHL or what's in it for the management who's maybe sponsoring, supporting with resources, it's this idea that this labor market of over 600,000 employees has so much more potential than maybe the external employee market, and this is why we should foster this inner development processes and mobility and so on and so forth, and with that maybe save money that we would have otherwise spent it in big recruiting campaigns and so on and so forth. Is that
absolutely 100%? Plus the fact that if you build your talent from within in a company like DHL, their culture is so strong, the complexity of the we know that people who stay are, once you stay 2 years in DHL, you're going to stay 7 or 8 or 10 years, because you become part of that culture. You perform at a higher level, you're more engaged, the products better, the customers better. It's a win-win-win-win-win all around. And in addition to that, the external markets are shrinking, right? So even if they haven't in every country in the world yet reached a critical point, what we know for sure is that in the vast majority of countries, there is a declining labour market, particularly skilled, and an increasing demand. So at some point they're going to cross, and we want to be ready.
Yeah, I mean, Manuel, you also said at the very beginning, in one of our prior discussions, it needs this business model, right? For a company to really invest and to get this management buy-in, to get something like a skill, based or driven organization going. How was it at Bayer?
So similar like Meredith, I think I had 2 aha moments kind of on this journey. My first aha moment was when I was actually first on the job, a manager calling me and saying, gosh, Manuel, how can it be that platforms like LinkedIn or others know more about our employees than we as an employer? And, it took me some time to realize, actually, that's also true for myself. LinkedIn, in terms of skills, what I'm capable of and what suggestions LinkedIn is actually making me is much better than what my own employer is doing with me. So that kept me thinking on saying, gosh, we need to solve first for a very basic use case, which is, and Meredith alluded to this, let's get the transparency about what everybody is actually capable of doing. But that was the first aha moment I had, to think, gosh, it's just about creating this transparency on what assets we actually have in our own organization and not having to go externally to hire those skills externally. And the second, aha moment very much was when you think about our business transformation, which we are calling dynamic shared ownership, there's one key principle in this, which we call talent flow. And talent flow has at its core that we're moving talent to work rather than work to talent. Like in a traditional way, you start with work and say, oh, who wants this work? You don't start with the talent, you start with the work. Well, in a skill-based organization, you start with the talent and the skills of the talent and then go to the work.
Yeah.
And, in DSO, a principle where we are fundamentally changing the way how we are operating, building our organization from the customer. If you're not able to move talent to work, you have a pretty significant problem. And that were the two aha moments where I said, gosh, skill transparency is first. And then second, enabling a mechanism to let talent flow to work in using technology to a certain extent, supported by the right mindset of the leaders in our organization. That is making the trick, not saying that we've solved it all.
Yeah. I just have to add something to it. I've never thought of this before. It literally just popped into my brain then. But remember I'm old, so I remember. Yeah, Moritz, you probably don't. But in the old days of Jack Welch and get all the good people on the bus and then decide which seats they're going to sit in. Actually, it's come full circle now, right? Let's get all the great employees in the business and then decide which jobs that, what roles, what tasks, what activities they're going to be doing based on the skills they have, and be a bit more sort of agile and adaptive around that. And yeah, that might sound idealistic, but actually it's a very efficient way of running an organization if you have an understanding of the skills they've got.
Yeah, I would also add as one aspect we learn, with clients is also in days like this, this whole topic of right sizing and becoming more flexible in where do we actually grow our business in the world and where do we maybe have to also shrink our business again. I mean, it just shows so much dynamic in businesses and organizational structures and this needs, I guess, this more fluid workforce or this flow of talent, that like blood fuels this kind of transformations in a way, right?
It's true. And the fact of the matter is, and I think, Manuel, you'll agree with me on this one for sure, is that skills is just one data point. Like, it's not that skills is the answer to it all.
Yeah.
It is one data point. You need many other data points in order to make those agile sort of adaptive decisions about where your people are going to go, where you're going to redeploy them to, how you're going to upskill them or allocate them in the workforce. That strategic, I'm not going to call it strategic workforce planning. I'm going to call it strategic workforce programming is actually something that you need multiple data points for, and skills is just one of those. But it's exciting because we've never really been able to do it at scale before, and finally we can.
Okay, so let's assume we have this management buy-in, right? They bought the idea, they see how, this whole development towards a, skill-based organization really fuels their business transformation and helps them maybe to even, leverage some efficiencies on a human side, but also on a spending side when it comes to, I don't know, recruiting, spending, etc. I mean, the next group in line, I guess, is somehow the employees, right? I mean, why should they join? And I think this is, one of the key challenges that skill management had for the last 10 years, right? To get this data accuracy and, get people involved in that sense. And before we jump into this, we picked a very small film, I think from DHL Group, where I think one team of yours tries to explain to an employee why this idea of a skill-based organization actually makes sense, and not to spoil it, but one element or core element to the user end is this opportunity marketplace, or this idea of an opportunity marketplace that gets, I think, best explained in those next 60 seconds. So Tanya, give us the movie.
A long time ago, our people were presented with multiple options to develop their career. While the content was rich and vast, navigating through the sea of opportunities proved to be a challenge, making it difficult to find the perfect fit. One day, a transformative solution was born, one designed to revolutionize the way our people connect with opportunities at DHL Group. Introducing Career Marketplace, your personalized one-stop shop for career growth. Simply tell us what you're good at, your aspirations, and our AI provides you with top recommendations. How does it work? The more information you provide, the better the recommendations you receive. Whether you're looking for a new role or want to upskill in your current one. Our career marketplace ensures that every opportunity is perfectly aligned with your aspirations. Benefits? There are plenty. See how well you match to jobs, explore training for your aspirational role, be more visible to HR and managers across the group, and much more. Say goodbye to endless searches and hello to a brighter future with Career Marketplace. Your skills, your career, your journey at DHL Group starts here.
Whenever I see this movie,
My baby.
it reminds me a bit at the Lego movie with this, everything is awesome, everything is possible, kind of, right? And I mean, that's very compelling, but maybe also overwhelming, right, in a way. So what would you say are the key, arguments? What's in it for employees at DHL, but also at Bayer to join and to really register and put in the effort?
Yeah. I mean, I think, DHL is a very employee-centric organization, and it was always something that they talked about wanting to ensure that all employees have visibility of opportunities in the company. It's natural, it's human nature that some individuals are just better at self-promoting. Men tend to be better at it than women through their networks. Some people just know how to market themselves effectively. It doesn't mean that they are better at doing, they're just better at promoting. And the marketplace then kind of somehow levels the playing field a little bit. And DHL saw it. I mean, before I left DHL, some of the successes were really around more women getting visibility and access to roles. If a woman is presented, anecdotally, if a woman is presented with an offer of maybe this is a role that could suit you, they would be more inclined to apply for that than if the same role was simply offered in a regular search on the career site, where they might tend to go, oh, maybe I'm not really ready for it yet. So there are things that really make that an important part of being an employee in an organization like DHL, where you become more visible, things are more transparent, there's a sense of equity and access. And employees really appreciate receiving a recommendation on whether it's a career recommendation or a job recommendation, or very importantly, learning recommendations. Because if I apply for a job and don't get it, and then the system comes back to me and says, it's okay, like maybe you'd like to do some trainings to close that gap, that actually feels good. That's engaging. So yeah, it's cute to see that video.
Yeah, and I mean, just maybe one little anecdote. I think on our last session, you were talking about, I think, especially as you said, women in tech from Latin America, for example.
Yes.
Tapping into this career opportunity with around tech and data, and maybe you can just share it, because for me this was one of the big aha moments of our session.
Yeah, it was the whole piece around, traditionally those roles were very male-dominated roles, and and some of those women were not even from the tech and data, the sort of technology, but they recognised that they had skills that could be transferred and applied in those environments, and we saw, and there were even some voices I think we had on the video last time that talked about the benefit that they'd received once they were aware that this was a job that they could possibly do, they were prompted to apply. And then the number of them that actually took jobs was incredible. They started to move into roles that were traditionally male dominated, where they wouldn't have thought to apply before. Moving out of finance, moving out of all different types of roles into, and loving it and being successful at it. So,
Manuel, why should someone join at Bayer? This Bayer opportunity marketplace. What's in it for them?
So I think the one point, and Meredith alluded to this, and this is super powerful if you launch it, it's kind of the democratization of opportunities, right? I refer to this sometimes as we're unbossing the career of our people. It's not that, now I have to go to my boss and say, look, there is an opportunity on the marketplace, am I able to explore it? So the way how we are really positioning it, this is the maximum empowerment that you as an employee can get. And it's up to you whether you use the chance to do that or not. Right? Moving away from a manager-led career to more an employee-led career. Moving a little bit away, and this is pretty traumatic changes if you really think this through, right? Also in the way how you kind of think about your career as such, right? In the past, I think, and I would say still in many companies, career development means upwards promotion. And we kind of get hung up on the idea of, gosh, you only get a promotion if you move to the next job. Actually, in a more agile model, career development means growth through new experiences and new skills that you gain outside of the area that you are working. Right. And that is really what is in for our people. Right. In the past, we talked about, this concept of, do a training, and after the training, you know more. We all know that isn't working.
Yeah.
So what is working, you actually have to apply it, and you actually have to apply it outside of the area where you're working. That is where it is most effective. And that is what Opportunity Marketplace at the end of the day is about. Like, I loved the video that we had on DHL. We have a similar video at Bayer that basically makes the story of empower yourself. It's your career, it's your choices, and that's how we go about it.
I want to weave in one of the first questions that we get here in our session, and I assume it's this let's say seasoned top manager who would say, what? Wait a moment. Democratizing careers, democratizing learning, giving freedom. Well, what happens, if people are motivated to learn something that the organization doesn't really need, right? I mean, it goes into this question: how do you marry the two, the skills the organization needs and what people are actually motivated to learn? Any examples? Thank you, Catalina, by the way, for the question. How would you respond to this kind of manager, criticizing or questioning what's happening here?
I think from my side, the question I would be asking right back is, what is really the concern? Because actually, whether they learn something that's not 100% relevant to the organization that's bizarre. Of course, they're learning things that are not relevant to the organization every day in their life. They're learning it at home, they're learning it on the way into work, they're learning it on their lunch break while they're reading the newspaper. So that's not the issue, is it? What is the manager really afraid of? They're afraid that time that they should be consuming work-based activities will be used on learning that doesn't directly impact the work, right? I think that's what the problem is that we're trying to face. And for me, there's a couple of ways of looking at that. It's different depending on which job you have, for sure. And it's also about who defines what's the relevant content for the job, right? Who is it that decides that when I'm working as a, cloud architect, that studying building architecture is not relevant, because actually some of the best learning comes from the extrapolation of information from non-traditional contexts, right? You learn a lot by reflecting on forests when it comes to human health and well-being, right? This is curiosity, comparison. I could go on and on and on. I always remember that there was an author, a psychologist, who wrote some really nice books back probably in the 90s, I guess, called Stephanie Burns. And she always used to talk about the best way to learn to be detail-oriented is to learn a skill like knitting. Because if you can knit, you know that you can apply that attention to detail in many different contexts. So who decides what's relevant learning and what's not? I know that's not an easy
in particular answer. Maybe in a time of so much business uncertainty, I would even add, right?
Yes.
So and then, I mean, I'll never forget the conversation I had with the chief learning officer of Lego, who said back then, when the whole kind of skill-based organization train started, said, wait a moment, one of our core values at Lego is curiosity. And if we, now recommend everyone to learn the next thing, do we with that, also damage the curiosity in the company? Because we want people, to explore and be self-motivated and look a little bit left and right, because that brings the creativity to our business, which is fundamental for, a toys company like Lego. But maybe I think that's maybe first answer. And with that, maybe just a second question before we get deeper into this whole change, aspect, which I think is the whole, story here actually behind the skill-based organization. It's a big company, cultural also transformation, but maybe spending 1 minute on this technology side, because it's also asked, right? Great discussion. I'd be interested in knowing, how do you technically enable and scale capturing skill inventory in such big corporations as Bayer or DHL? Yes, technology, we had it at the beginning, is fundamental for all of that. Maybe Manuel, how do you do that?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think it's a multi-stage process that you kind of have to engage with. I think the first one is you have to help your employees in terms of thinking, what are actually the skills that I possess? It's a very basic question. And you will say, gosh, doesn't an employee know what he or she is capable of? Actually, this is where it starts, right? How technology can help this. I mean, we have these days passing technology, CV passing capabilities where you upload a resume. And I mean, you don't need a fancy technology these days, right? ChatGPT can do it as well, right? And what it comes out with, it suggests you a number of skills that it's reading out of your resume and hence suggesting it to you. So that's where it starts with. Kind of build your own skill profile in a meaningful manner that kind of describes what you're doing it. So that's where you start with. Now, that is what many companies kind of start with, but then also stop with, right? Then you look from a data perspective, and I remember that call that manager that I was referring to that was asking me early on the journey, well, doesn't LinkedIn know more than we do? That same manager asked me a year later and said, Manuel, you've collected now all of that skill data from your employees. What do you know more? And I mean, my honest answer was, well, actually, if I look at the aggregated individual skill data, it's not that I know not more, which I wouldn't have known if we wouldn't have launched the technology. And there comes now the second piece of your journey. It's one thing of collecting the individual skills from your organization. It's a whole different topic if you want to land this in the business and you ask the business, what are the skills that you actually need for a certain job or for a certain area? Right? And that is a pretty fundamental second step on your journey, because if you don't come to that journey, your whole skills journey will feel loose end, because all you're doing is you're collecting individual skill data. You won't have any skill gaps. You won't be able to derive any clever learning recommendations out of it.
So there will be no opportunity, right? There is no opportunity. It's it's a one-sided market then.
Exactly. It's like you're going to a marketplace and you offer something, but there's nothing you're going to get. That isn't a great experience. So make sure that the offering is attractive, right? And you make this by doing your homeworks on preparing this organization, what you actually bring to the marketplace. And kind of the last piece where I guess, every organization is striving then to become to is that you connect skills to your entire ecosystem. And you do this by actually embedding it into your business. That is where you want to go to. Now, no company that I know has fully cracked this, right? Have included it in all the HR process, meaning from performance management to learning, how you pay people and so on. And it's led by the business. Look, I have met a company who was telling me that is what they achieve, but that is the ultimate goal. That is the vision where we want to go to, but it's a long way, right, to go. And many companies stop at some point in time again. And then I think it's the learning on the way, on the journey to see, where your journey is leading you.
Let's look a little bit on this change, which is a prerequisite, I guess, to make what you said, this kind of business-led skill-based organization possible. And I think one is on an employee side, and you talked about it by this manager-led to the employee-led career. The other thing is that this needs a lot of change, right? Means a lot of change for an employee, to take ownership for their careers, for a leader, to change also their beliefs on, talent I once hired is mine, versus no, it's the talent of the organization. And so let's dive a bit into this kind of change process here. And then let's kick it off maybe with a graphic manual from Bayer. I just saw it on a conference you were talking, I think, about it, which tries to show this shift from this employee-led to or this manager-led to this employee-led career. Maybe you can just walk us through what are the fundamental shifts that have to happen on a cultural side, on a behavioral side, to actually, get this idea of a skill-based organization going.
Yeah, happy to do that, Moritz. So I think, every skill journey to a certain extent will be successful or not be successful, depending on how you are able to land this from a change management perspective with your employees, but particularly with your leaders. One of the phrases that I sometimes use is, we want to move our managers to become a talent exporter rather than a talent holder. Mm-hmm. In traditional companies, we have a lot of talent holders, right? I hired this talent, I have the resources and the ownership of this talent, so make sure that this talent doesn't flow anywhere else, which is outside of my control. That is the traditional mindset you'll have to fight against if whenever you're going to go into a skill-based organization. And some of the shifts, when you think about how a traditional organization is based on, is that organizations traditionally are built around a hierarchy. And the career development idea is based on you move up the corporate ladder, right? And the higher you move, the higher you get paid, right? In very simple terms. This is kind of the traditional way how organizations are set up these days. And Bayer was, and still is to a certain extent, set up that way. And you want to move this to where career development actually isn't just climbing the corporate ladder, but it is more about growth and new experience. That may not mean that you're climbing the traditional corporate ladder, but you actually do side moves, or how we call it, you embrace into a squiggly career, right? But it turns the whole thing around, right? Because we've told all our managers from the past how to develop people, and suddenly we're changing this concept. So from a learning perspective, there is a significant unlearning process to embrace into this new concept, right? And you see all of the other things that are alluded to this. It starts with the role of a manager. Moving, where actually the manager plans the career and has all the discussion, where it's your leaders, your peers, and others who support you on your career journey, right? And it's a pretty significant mindset in terms of embarking on such a skill-based journey.
Meredith, is that resonating?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've always said, and when I was at DHL, I probably drove my team crazy, because I used to say it all the time, this is an upside down project. This is more change management on a people perspective than it is technology implementation. Of course, you need the technology, there's no doubt about it, but we needed it. There is an argument to say you don't even need it if you've got a smaller company and so forth. But this shift from particularly a company like DHL, but many companies in the world that have aging leadership teams. So the average age of a leader in an organization, might be 48 or 54 or whatever, and those leaders have never in their leadership careers worked in an environment which is talent scarcity. It's always been abundant. It's always been, it seems to be a day of talking XGE, but that, bottom box out mindset. If it doesn't work, if they don't have the skills, if we don't like them, we get rid of them. No, that's not an option anymore. And not only is it tasteless now these days to be doing mass redundancies, it gets in the media, it's bad for the reputation, but it's also very difficult to recover the skills that you lose when you do that. So so you have to help those leaders, because if they've grown up in talent abundant environments, to then shift to be in a talent scarce environment is very difficult. So
and I
really
think
like what you said, Manuel.
Yeah, and I think one key element of that, or muscle, let's say, that leaders in particular have to kind of find and then train, is actually shaping the career or developing, an employee. I think you said it, in one video snippet, I saw it, Meredith, on your LinkedIn, that, when it comes to performance management, and my personal belief is performance management of the future will be more development than ever before, right? Because jobs are changing faster than before. But you said it's this good guy discussion that was I think your words for this typical performance management conversation that now have to shift into a real kind of coaching situation, and that's something we see many leaders struggling with. What was the observation there?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add to it because there's something else that Manuel mentioned that I think is really critical on it, and that is that, all of that, whether it's the good guy conversation which we have today, which tends to be tick the box, I have to do a talent panel, or I just need to check in with my people every now and again just to make sure that they're not leaving me, but then I let them alone and just give them a whack if they don't perform. No, all of that has to stop, because actually what's critical now is that employees not only feel valued by their manager, can talk openly about their choices at work, at home, balancing work and life, how they're feeling psychologically safe, secure, are they feeling, overwhelmed? There's so many things that are expected from leaders today that the whole idea of saying, in some companies, which will remain unnamed, there may have been processes which required managers to sign to say that someone was allowed to apply for a job in another part of the business. Hello, And then lastly, HR's role in that, which was to cater for the lowest common denominator, to find those, what I call bad leaders in the business who were hoarding talent, and HR would set up processes to enable them to continue to hoard talent. And it's like, no, stop.
Wow.
Let's celebrate the really great leaders who are developing their people, who are building careers, who are having open conversations with their people. And that open conversation might be something like, Manuel, I really don't want to lose you right now. I really would love it if you would stay with me for another 6 months. And if you do, I'm going to support you on your career direction. If you really want your people to stay, then have open, honest conversations about why you want them to stay and what the plan is for them when you realize that you can't keep them forever, that type of thing.
I mean, Meredith, what you're saying is even more relevant in an AI environment, right? Where you could easily think, well, let's just delegate this task to technology. And I loved how you said it, Meredith. And that has also been my experience over the last year. Technology will never solve it. It will never solve it, right? So even with a self-empowered career development, technology will make you proposals. It still requires people to make choices. And specifically when it comes to the role of a leader, specifically in an AI environment, those conversations, the human touch, skills like courageous, like authenticity, empathy, they become so important because they are the glue of actually people staying in your organization rather than them getting extracted and leaving the organization.
Absolutely. I really love this concept of the adaptive leader. This leader who realizes that there is no singular cause and effect way to lead anymore. If there ever was, I would argue not, but let's say there was. Today, that's gone. I have to be a leader who can adapt in the moment. We all have to almost be general managers now, right? I have to be able to adapt to what's going on in the world around me, to the changes in my industry, to the changes in my team, to the, to the young people that are coming in who know how to do incredible things with incredible tools that I've never even heard of before. I have to learn how to adapt. And that's not really been required so much in the past.
Since you are front runners, right? And I assume we have a lot of people, listening who are rather, the majority. So they were observing, how is this whole, thing going, and when is the right moment for us to join in? Based on all your experience, if you would have, this mandate today to build a skill-based organization starting from scratch, what would you do? And maybe also what would you do differently?
Meredith, you want me to have a start and then you,
you go.
you go?
It's a hard question. You go.
I know.
I saved it for the end, right? To make sure we definitely, you know, expose our 60 minutes.
So thinking about this, I think three things come to mind. If I would restart the whole thing again, my first recommendation, you know, to this community, if you're in a small company and saying, gosh, I hear about this, but where do I get started? My recommendation number one is go where the energy is, right?
Yeah.
Often, you know, a skill-based organization or the concept of skills isn't applied and isn't a reality in all the functions you're dealing with, right? Specifically where work is more organized in a traditional way, right? Work and then talent rather than talent and work. That's most likely not the area to start with, right? Normally functions like R&D, IT, where there is already a lot of focus on skills and relevant of skills, where work is also organized in projects, that's normally the spot where to start.
Yeah.
And in there is a lot of energy. So go where there's energy and don't spend your time with discussing with functions, say, gosh, I don't need skills. All I need is people doing some work, right? So start where there's energy. That would be my first recommendation. My second one would be very clear in terms of what you are trying to solve for. What problem is it that you're trying to solve with skills? And be outspoken about it, because you could solve everything, but you can also solve for nothing. So be very clear about what is the problem you're trying to solve. In our case, at Bayer, it's the talent flow topic, right? But be very clear about what you start. If I would kind of redo this again, I think one thing that I've learned, you cannot introduce skills. Well, you first introduce skills kind of at a side concept, but sooner or later, you'll have to have an answer to the question, how does this fit from an end-to-end perspective? And you better have this answer a little bit earlier than in the middle of the journey, you figured out, oh, actually, this end-to-end questions, I have really no answer to. Well, you know, I would have had this answer a little bit earlier, knowing that nobody has the perfect answer, but at least that you can paint a picture on where you're including it to make it meaningful to people. Just throwing the ball over to you. Yeah.
And what I hear from that is also, Manuel, there, you know, getting away maybe from this idea that there is this blueprint, right? And that I just, you know, can copy and paste what works here, and that it's rather a journey, you know, where also the way is in that sense also already part of the kind of results that you get.
Yeah.
Meredith.
Definitely. I mean, you know, when we started the skills journey, I drove everybody mad on saying, this is a marathon. We just started and we're at 3 meters. Right? So this is where we are, right? So you won't solve anything as you get on this journey. It's a long run. You have to be prepared for.
Yeah, I think I would. Well, they would have been close to my 3, but I'll try and add one or two more. But I think one big one, and it ties a little bit in with the change management piece, and that is do something. Right? Don't you know, talk at your navel for 2.5 years trying to figure out the perfect answer, because you know there is no perfect answer. So do something and adapt and learn and you know, apply some agile thinking so that you get momentum going. Because, and this is the point Manuel made earlier, skills are so new to people. We had stories where we would ask people, you know, so what skills, you know, would you put into that, you know, and, oh, no, I don't have any skills. Oh, you don't have skills? So what makes you good at your job? Oh, well, I'm really good at this. I'm really good at this. Those are your skills. No, you know, so people are unsure what to call the skills. So, you know, do something so you can get that change progressing as early as possible. The second thing is, and I always say this one, so maybe it's a bit of a broken record, but, you know, in the HR discipline or in the field of human resources, there is a little tendency to want to get the theory right and the practice precise and exact. And there are times when that's very important, like when you're going through big legal cases and so on and so forth. But actually, when it comes to things particularly like the skills topic, where there is no dominant design yet, right? So we're still all working towards something. Don't try to get it exact. Just try to, because visibility on skills that are not exact is better than what you've got today, which is visibility on nothing. So, at least try and get something progressing. And then I think the final one that I would jump in on is to say that, and it maybe again ties into one that you raised, Manuel, is know what your organization is using skills for. So that idea, and it was the perfect example talking about R&D being the great target, but it also works at an organizational level. If you're an organization that, I don't know, makes bricks, and that's all your people do is make bricks, and you have it all well established and structured, maybe you don't need a big platform. Maybe you still want to do skills, but you're just going to use an Excel spreadsheet, and that's enough. But if you're management consulting, or if you're in tech development, or if you're in, you're going to want to do this, because you're going to have to find talent eventually. What do we talk about when you're looking for oil and then you have this hard oil, like the stuff that's really hard to find? Well, that won't be long before we're looking for hard talent. That's very hard to find talent deep out in the ocean. So,
And maybe one last question before we come also a bit to the end of the session. But so you were on this journey, you were in this roller coaster, those ups and downs, and what were very kind of concrete signs that you saw coming up that it's working? How do you see it's working? And this can be numbers, that can be anecdotes, that can be, something that gives you proof that you're on the right way.
I mean, I was going to say it's probably a little bit irrelevant for me to share DHL numbers today, but one thing I can say is that the number of skills that became visible to us very quickly. So we started with no data on skills, and with a very short period of time had a large amount of data that we could do meaningful things with. So that's one big success piece. I think the other is the engagement with the platform. So we saw things like an increase in learning consumption, an increase in internal job application. And they weren't little increases, they were hefty, and I'm sure that's continued since I left at the end of last year, but it's good.
Yeah, maybe a couple of things that come to mind, from our perspective. Indeed, like if you look at the engagement score of people actually creating a profile, a skill profile, that tells a lot. In our case, we launched our marketplace beginning of this year. Well, 55% have already created a profile in an organization. Do not forget, we're in product supply. You have people who don't have access to computers, right? So you will never get to 100%, right? So, but already after half a year, that's quite a good thing. We've stuffed 500 projects on this platform, 500, right?
Wow.
Where people have from one country to another suddenly joined a project. And then what made me trick, and that was kind of a moment of pride, was when I woke up one morning and then there was a guy who published a video basically on the intranet where he was telling in a language that I didn't quite get. He was basically telling his excitement about, him being out of Japan and having for the first time in his career the opportunity to join a project based out of a completely different country where without the platform he would have never had any chance to engage with. And what it did with him in a very authentic, unscripted way, nobody asked him to do that video, but how authentic he told his story, what it did to them, was heartbreaking, because that is really what this is, right?
I love that. I love that so much, because that is what this is, right? This is about making people's lives better at work. We're all trying desperately hard to do it, and it's super hard. And nobody says that working in a large organization is easy, but this is a reward that we never had access to before, and that employees could not ever do. And I say reward not in the sense of money or, but in terms of exactly what you just said about that guy, that suddenly I'm visible, suddenly I have an opportunity I never had before. Why would I leave when that exists in my company?
Yeah, and when you were talking about this video, I immediately thought, well, it's the impersonation of engagement scores, right? That companies assess every year. There you have it, right? It's
right,
all over the place in this video, I assume. And that's what a company wants, right? Because this creates the energy, to take the next heights. Whether it's a new technology, whether it's a new market entry, you need people, like this. Looking towards the time, I have one last and final question for you. Let's assume the following. You guys are standing, in an elevator with, this super critical manager, or maybe just a manager, and he's asking you, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? So what's this elevator pitch? You get, this person convinced, on board, to buy in. Right. That's my question for you, because I think this is what many L&D professionals sometimes are looking for. Right. What is this pitch?
From obviously that is buyer specific, but buyer is moving from a traditional hierarchical based organization to an organization of networks of teams. Such a change can only happen if we maximize talent flow at scale, moving talent to work rather than work to talent. Without that, you as a manager in that new setup will not be successful. It's as easy as that.
Yeah. And I would say, let me help you to manage your team, to have it ready for the future, to drive best performance by enabling learning, growth, and movement opportunities that will not only ensure that you have the right people at the right time in the right place, but will also make sure that they're engaged, happy, and saying nice things about you as a leader. So.
Happy drop. I think that's it. Thank you so much, both of you. Really, I appreciate it. Thanks for your courage. Without people like you, going those, very hard first steps, exploring a topic where you don't really know whether it will become, this hype or not, is super critical for the whole L&D world and HR world. Thank you for taking the time. It was so much fun having you. And everyone who was, dialing in, thank you for joining us here at Good Morning L&D. Have a good day with a lot of inspiration about skill-based organizations, I hope. Goodbye.
Thanks for having us, Moritz.
Thank you,
Moritz.
Thank you,
Manuel.
Bye.
Bye.